I remember the exact moment I realized how utterly reckless Jonathan Cross really was. It wasn't during a high-stakes board meeting, or in a conference room filled with investors, or even when he humiliated me in front of half the executive team. No, it was when I tried to open the main entrance door to my own office building, and it didn't budge. Not a click, not a hum, nothing. The electronic lock refused my access. And that's when it hit me. The new CEO had just fired me. And he had no idea I owned the building. I paused there in the early morning chill, my briefcase in one hand, the other pressed flat against the glass, watching the reflection of Jonathan's smug face on the other side, striding past security with the kind of confidence only a man who thinks he is untouchable could muster. My own lobby, the marble floors I had walked every day for the last 12 years, had become a foreign place, one where I was now a trespasser in my own domain. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent over a decade here, not just analyzing spreadsheets and balancing budgets, but quietly understanding the pulse of this company. The building layouts, the lease agreements, the inner workings of HR and the board, the blind spots in the security cameras that no one else cared about. All of it, and now, all that knowledge suddenly became a weapon I could wield, and a vindication waiting to happen. It started small. Jonathan's first week as CEO felt like walking on thin ice. The first red flag appeared during a Monday morning strategic briefing. I had spent 3 solid days revising our quarterly financial projections, adjusting for every market fluctuation, every pending lease negotiation, every departmental overhead. I had a meticulously annotated report in my folder. Rows of numbers, color-coded charts, notes in the margins, and cross-references to regulatory filings. Jonathan barely glanced at it. He leaned back in his overly polished leather chair, fingers steepled, and muttered, "Lucas, these projections are outdated. Overly conservative. We need something bolder." I remember the words hitting me like a slap, but in a quiet, almost invisible way. He didn't say it to insult me, at least, not out loud, but to assert authority. To remind me he was the CEO. Then came the efficiency audits. Small memos circulated in my department. All finance and operations teams will undergo weekly efficiency assessments, starting immediately. The memo was neatly formatted in Calibri 11, hex code number 1A1A1A, marked with the subtle watermark, Confidential CEO. On the surface, it looked like a standard corporate initiative, but a closer read revealed something troubling. Only my department was affected. No one else in marketing, sales, or IT received anything similar. The audits were designed to micromanage, to scrutinize my every action, down to how long it took me to approve petty office supply invoices. I felt the unease creeping in. My authority was being chipped away by minutiae, policies designed for compliance theater, not actual improvement. And Jonathan didn't know, couldn't possibly know, that while he thought he was consolidating control, he was playing in my backyard. A few weeks later, Jonathan outdid himself. I had spent 6 months compiling a comprehensive report on a potential corporate expansion. Market analysis, projected returns, operational scalability, legal risk assessments. Every night after leaving the office, I'd cross-reference lease agreements, tax filings, and regional zoning regulations. I even traced the chain of ownership on several properties the company was considering acquiring. I walked into the investor pitch fully prepared, my report neatly bound in a leather portfolio. But within the first 10 minutes, Jonathan began to speak. And he spoke as if he had conceived the entire strategy himself. "We've modernized our financial approach," he announced, gesturing at the graphs I had prepared, beyond the old-fashioned metrics some of our legacy staff were accustomed to. Every eye in the room turned to me. My voice caught in my throat. I wanted to interrupt, to clarify, but every time I opened my mouth, he waved me off, a patronizing smile plastered across his face. By the end of the hour, investors were nodding, impressed by his vision, and I was left scribbling notes to myself in a notebook, documenting exactly what had just transpired. Afterward, I sat alone in my office, counting the seconds before the next email ping. I opened my inbox and found the official investor follow-up from Jonathan, CC'd to the board. Subject line: Exciting new strategy, presented by Jonathan Cross. Every attachment, every chart, every recommendation I had labored over was now officially credited to him. I didn't react, not immediately. I started logging everything. Email timestamps, memo copies, meeting minutes. Every slight, every undermining comment, every moment of erasure. I wasn't angry yet. I was calculating. It was a Monday. I had expected routine, maybe some post-weekend chaos, but nothing prepared me for the audacity that morning. The team gathered for a regular Monday briefing when Jonathan dropped the bomb. "Lucas," he said, voice clipped, eyes scanning the room with a kind of casual cruelty I hadn't witnessed in person before. "You're no longer required here. Your position is redundant." I blinked. My hands, still holding a coffee mug, started to shake, not from fear, but from a dawning awareness. He had just fired me. Outright, publicly, and he didn't even know the simplest, most fundamental fact. I owned the building. By the time HR appeared with the official termination notice and the new building access codes, I realized I was locked out. My thumb slipped across the access panel and the LED flashed red. My office, my personal property, was now a fortress controlled by someone blissfully ignorant of property law. I stood in the lobby, coffee cold in my hand, watching Jonathan stride past security guards as if he owned the place. And in that moment, I made a decision. I would not react with anger. I would not storm his office or quit in a dramatic scene. I would plan, methodically, patiently, and when the time came, every misstep, every overreach, every arrogance-fueled assumption Jonathan had made would be used against him. I walked out of the lobby that morning with a single thought. He had forgotten one thing. One very important thing, and I was going to remind him, mercilessly. I spent that first week locked out pacing the perimeter of the building I'd walked through every day for 12 years. The lobby smelled the same, polished marble, faint traces of brewed coffee from the cafe corner, but the security guards looked at me like I was a visitor, a ghost wandering in someone else's home. I had to remind myself to breathe slowly, to keep my composure. Every instinct screamed at me to storm Jonathan's office, to demand my access back, to call HR and make a scene. But I knew better. I had always known better. I leaned against the east stairwell door, the one that had a blind spot in the surveillance cameras, and ran my fingers along the cold metal. That blind spot would be crucial. I already knew it, from years of memorizing every corner of this building, every overlooked security quirk. I had walked these halls at night to measure how long it took maintenance staff to finish inspections, noted which cameras rotated on what cycle, and even the timing of the cleaning crew's access. This was no longer just knowledge, it was ammunition. It was in that stairwell that I reached my breaking point. My anger didn't flare like a fire, it settled like ice in my chest. I realized I couldn't rely on anyone else to enforce justice. The board didn't know Jonathan yet. They trusted him because he had a glossy pedigree and an expensive suit. HR would smile politely and tell me, "We'll investigate," while my career hung in limbo. No, if anything was going to happen, it would have to happen through me. And then I smiled, not because I felt better, but because the clarity was intoxicating. Every document Jonathan had mishandled, every policy he had violated, every misstep he had made since day one, I could use it. Every memo in Calibri 11, hex number 1A1A1A, every internal email where he overstepped authority, every moment he treated me as a disposable employee. They were all notes in my ledger, and they were about to become evidence. I started with the obvious. I needed proof of his ignorance and overreach. Using my discreet access through the east stairwell blind spot, I set up my phone to record the entrances and exits from the executive floor. I noted the exact rotation schedule of the cameras. 12 hours per cycle, with 2 cameras covering the stairwell intermittently. By recording at precise intervals, I could capture Jonathan moving sensitive documents without proper authorization. I made sure every step, every violation, was timestamped down to the minute. Next, I returned to the employee handbook. Page 142, paragraph 6.4.3. No CEO may unilaterally restrict access to leased premises without written consent from the legal property owner or board oversight. I had never imagined I would need to weaponize this clause. I printed it in high resolution, underlined the key phrases, and noted previous examples in company history where similar violations had led to legal consequences. I even annotated it in the margins with cross-references to property law statutes, creating a dossier that could not be ignored. Then came the plan. It had to be meticulous. Jonathan was reckless, impulsive. He would act without thinking, which meant I had to outthink him at every turn. I began crafting a compliance audit request, disguised as a procedural necessity from an independent consultant. The wording was deliberate, polite, technical, almost bureaucratic in tone. But embedded within it was the leverage I needed. The explicit mention that my ownership of the building granted me the legal authority to access any part of the premises and enforce proper conduct. I emailed HR first, blind copying the legal department, and copied the board chair with a polite note. Subject: Compliance Audit Request, Property Access and Internal Protocol Review. Dear HR and board members, I am requesting a compliance audit under the terms outlined in Employee Handbook, page 142, paragraph 6.4.3, regarding property access and executive conduct. This review will ensure that all personnel, including executive officers, are adhering to established guidelines. Please confirm receipt and provide scheduling details at your earliest convenience. I waited, but not idly. I began planting additional breadcrumbs. I sent a memo, carefully formatted in the CEO's template, Calibri 11, hex number 1A1A1A, with the subtle, confidential CEO watermark intact, to make it look like standard communication. The memo highlighted procedural errors Jonathan had made: misfiled financial reports, unauthorized access to sensitive contracts, and improper use of company resources. Each point was factual, verifiable, and time-stamped. I didn't embellish a single word. The evidence spoke for itself. I also involved my real estate attorney. We drafted a cease and desist notice, clearly stating that any attempt to restrict my access to the property could constitute personal liability. The language was precise, leaving no room for ambiguity, and carefully referenced the lease agreement, building ownership records, and the same employee handbook clause I had annotated. I didn't send it yet. I needed Jonathan to continue overreaching just enough for the final trap to snap shut. For days, I monitored, I documented, I waited. Every step Jonathan took reinforced my position. He would storm into offices, barking orders, unaware that every misstep, every unauthorized removal of files, was being recorded. Every email he sent, every memo he drafted in his confident, careless style, was another brick in the case I was constructing. And all the while, I maintained appearances. Outside the building, I smiled, greeted colleagues, and even acted disappointed about being fired, careful to leak nothing of the plan I was setting in motion. The most dangerous part of revenge isn't the action itself, it's the patience. Waiting until the perfect moment, when every piece is in place, every angle covered, is where the true power lies. I knew the trap was ready the morning my phone vibrated with a notification from our. Not a call, not an apology, an email, subject line. Compliance Audit Request, Property Access and Internal Protocol Review. I stood across the street from the building, coffee untouched in my hand, watching employees badge in through the glass doors that still refused me entry. I opened the message slowly, deliberately, the way you open something you already know the contents of, but want to savor anyway. Lucas, we've reviewed your request and will be scheduling a preliminary discussion with the board and legal later this week. We were unaware of several of the points you raised and would like to clarify the situation. Regards, Marianne, HR Director. Unaware. That single word told me everything. Jonathan hadn't looped them in. He hadn't told the board. He had fired me like a man slamming a door, assuming no one would ever question whether he had the right to do it. That was when I sent the cease and desist. Not to Jonathan directly. That would have been too kind. I sent it to legal. And legal forwarded it to the board. And the board forwarded it to Jonathan. I imagined him opening it in his corner office. The one with the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The one I had personally approved during the last renovation budget. I imagined the confident smirk slipping just slightly as he read the first line. This letter serves as formal notice that any continued restriction of property access constitutes unauthorized exclusion under the terms of the lease agreement dated March 12, 2014. I knew the exact moment he finished reading it, because 5 minutes later, my phone rang. Jonathan Cross. I didn't answer. Let it ring. Let it go to voicemail. Let him sit with it. When I finally listened to the message, his voice was clipped, controlled, but the edge was there. Lucas, this is unnecessary. We can resolve this internally. Call me. Resolve this internally. The same man who had fired me publicly, locked me out, erased my work, now wanted discretion. I didn't call him back. Instead, I walked to the east stairwell and let myself in. Property owners don't need badges. The stairwell smelled faintly of cleaning solution and concrete dust. I took the steps 2 at a time, my footsteps echoing in the narrow space. When I reached the executive floor, I paused just long enough to check my watch. 9:42 a.m. right on schedule. Jonathan was mid-rant when I stepped into the hallway. I could hear him through the glass walls of the conference room, his voice sharp, accusatory, slicing through the air. The security cameras wouldn't catch me here. This was one of the blind spots I had cataloged years ago, when the building was still mine in name only. I pushed open the door. The room went silent. Jonathan turned first. His face shifted through 3 expressions in the span of a second: confusion, irritation, then something colder. "What the hell are you doing here?" he snapped. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't smile. I simply set a folder on the conference table. "I'm attending the compliance review," I said. "As the property owner." The board chair cleared her throat. "Property owner?" Jonathan laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "This is ridiculous. Lucas is a disgruntled former employee trying to—" "Jonathan," legal interrupted, flipping open the folder I'd brought. "We've verified the lease documents." Silence again, thicker this time. I watched the color drain from Jonathan's face as legal continued. "The building is owned by Bennett Holdings. Sole proprietor, Lucas Bennett." Jonathan stared at me now, really stared, as if trying to reconcile the image he had built in his head with the reality standing in front of him. "That's irrelevant," he said weakly. "This is about employment." "No," I said, calm, measured. "This is about access, and authority, and your habit of assuming you have both." I nodded to the screen at the end of the room. The first email appeared, then another, then a video feed, grainy but unmistakable, of Jonathan removing confidential finance files after hours. Time-stamped, logged, annotated. I watched his jaw tighten as legal read aloud. According to Employee Handbook, page 142, paragraph 6.4.3, she said, "No CEO may unilaterally restrict access to leased premises without written consent from the legal property owner or board oversight." She looked up. Neither was obtained. Jonathan's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "This is a misunderstanding," he said. "We can." "You can't," I interrupted. Still calm, still steady. "Every document, every access log, every email you sent using the CEO watermark. It's all recorded." I leaned forward slightly, just enough for him to hear me over the hum of the projector. "You fired me like I was disposable. You forgot one thing." I tapped the table once. "You don't own this place." "I do." The board chair didn't hesitate. "Jonathan Cross," she said, "effective immediately. You are suspended pending investigation." The room exhaled. Jonathan didn't look at anyone else. He just stared at me. The confidence was gone now, replaced by the dawning realization that his authority had never been absolute, just borrowed. Security escorted him out 20 minutes later. I stayed, not because I wanted to gloat, but because I wanted to watch the system correct itself. By the end of the week, Jonathan resigned to pursue other opportunities. Legal language, polite fiction. The real story traveled faster than any press release ever could. As for me, my access was restored. My role was reinstated, with revised terms. The board asked me to stay on as both financial lead and property liaison. They needed someone who understood structures. Not just buildings, but systems. Power. Consequences. Sometimes people ask me if it was revenge. I don't see it that way. I see it as memory. Because if there's one thing this place taught me, it's this: never forget who built the ground you're standing on. And if you've ever been pushed aside by someone who thought your silence meant weakness, tell me, what would you have done? Drop it in the comments. And if you want more stories where arrogance meets consequence, you know what to do. Subscribe.